Something I try to do every year when it comes to October is to watch a different horror movie every day. Welcome to the channel, guys. It's Isaac here. I wanted to share a horror tradition that I love with you guys that hopefully you guys find fun too. For every day in October, I will watch a different horror movie. Now, I have a couple of different methods of how I'm going to be watching these. As you can see on the table, I got a bunch of VHS tapes. That's my preferred favorite method of watching horror movies. Another thing that you can do to watch some of these horror movies, if you don't have them physically, watch them on a streaming platform. There's a ton of these movies that are available on places like Max, AMC Plus, Paramount Plus, Amazon Prime, and even a ton of free streaming services too. Places like Freevee, Plex, Tubi got a lot of really great movies, some of them that are even here on the list that I'll be watching. Let me know in the comments if there's a horror movie that I didn't mention already that you love, or if there's a movie in here that I did watch and you love it, let me know your take. I always love hearing new insights on the movies that I've already seen, or maybe even details that I didn't pick up on. But let's get right into it, guys, and start with day 1 of October and these 31 days of the horror movies that I watched for Halloween. Day 1, October 1st, I watched Child's Play 2. In this one, we see a returning Andy Barkley who has just been recently taken into a foster home, and he is still traumatized by the events of the first movie. Chucky himself in this movie is present basically throughout the beginning. One of the slower things about the first one is you had to wait a while before you started to see the doll move around. They even wanted to pitch the idea with the first movie of it was going to be psychological, maybe it was all in Andy's head. But for the second one, right off the bat, Chucky kills someone over at a Good Guy doll plant, and then he finds his way over to Andy's house where he is now staying, and there's just a lot of creepy places where he could be hiding. That's one thing I love about this movie is it really plays on the fear that kids would normally have. As a kid, you don't want to check the closet. There's a Good Guy doll in the closet on one of these scenes. As a kid, you don't want to check the basement. Chucky is in the basement during one of the scenes and has one of his more brutal kills of the series in that scene. The whole Good Guy doll factory scene is awesome. There's a scene where Chucky is in the factory terrorizing Kyle and Andy, the two protagonists of the movies, around a Good Guy doll factory where you just see nothing but the boxes of the Good Guy dolls everywhere. He could literally be anywhere, and it just creates this illusion of just being surrounded by Chuckies. And you get this pretty brutal scene too of his arm getting chopped off, and he replaces it with a knife and is just terrorizing them. Practical effects galore. I'm a big sucker for anything involving puppets. As you can see here, I got a physical manifestation of Chucky and a gremlin myself. And these series are just always a treat. And I can't forget to mention the school scene. The school scene is awesome. That's another fear you have. You don't want to get in trouble when you're a kid and you're in school. Well, Chucky follows Andy to school and starts terrorizing him and an unfortunate teacher that ends up becoming one of his victims. I love this movie. I can't think of anywhere to put it but A. I wouldn't quite put it S because I'm reserving that for very special movies that I find just about near perfect. But I'm putting it in A because I don't think it has enough flaws to drive it down a B. It's right before Chucky starts getting all these witty one-liners, and he's just a pleasure to have on screen the whole time. Love this movie, love this franchise. I'm putting it in A. Child's Play 2 for day 1. Moving on to day 2 for October 2nd, we watched Alice, Sweet Alice. Inspired by the Giallo movies, which is an Italian horror subgenre, Alice, Sweet Alice tries to take a lot of inspiration from those movies by trying to depict this feminine killer and also trying to just have a lot of really good scenery and imagery through the use of the church. This movie was originally going to be called Communion because it was supposed to take place during killings that happened after somebody's first communion. And you see these religious undertones kind of take place throughout the movie. Alice, the main character herself, is the daughter out of parents who had her before they were married. And they're in a very religious setting. So because of that, there's a lot of people who point to Alice or point to the family and say that what they did was wrong. And it sort of kind of haunts Alice throughout the movie. She's kind of seen as this little outcast, even within her own family, in terms of just the circumstances of her birth. And you see those interactions play out with the characters around them. Now, the whole movie itself takes place most of the time in this apartment building that is very narrow and tall and just has all these floors of different rooms. So everyone has to interact with each other just crossing through each other by the stairs. And it creates this claustrophobic feeling of there's really nowhere you can go. Once the killer is after you in those areas, you can't really go much further than up or down, and even then they're on your trail. I'm a big sucker for anything that came out before Halloween that has some elements of being a slasher movie. In this movie, we did have someone who was using a knife sometimes and had a creepy mask that looked like a doll, and they were wearing a yellow jacket. Those are elements that you'll find in a slasher movie. Some sort of masked character who's going around committing these heinous crimes on people and their victims. Those are elements that you see in slashers, and Halloween is usually pointed at as the poster child for what created the not so much the formula, because other movies did incorporate that type of style before, just like with movies like Black Christmas, Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and like I said before, a bunch of giallo movies. But I'm a sucker for anything before Halloween that has those types of elements. I did have a good time with Alice Sweet Alice. It's not a perfect movie. A lot of the scenes tend to slow down sometimes, especially when the characters are discussing their dynamics between Alice and the family. And I would recommend it. I'm going to put it in B. So Alice Sweet Alice, I'm giving a B. I recommend it if you like things like giallo or just early proto slashers. Check this one out. It's something different, I guarantee, than a lot of movies that you'll typically get recommended on most Halloween lists. For October 3rd, day 3, I watched Mario Bava's Blood and Black Lace. Now, Blood and Black Lace came out in 1964 and is a giallo movie. Giallo being an Italian term for these movies that combine the eeriness and the mystique that comes with death, but they also try to mix it with an element of beauty. You see that with the actors that they choose. They're usually people who are well known for their looks and their beauty, and they also try to go for colors and great set design. This movie right off the bat just oozes fashion. The beginning scene is just the silhouettes of all of the characters standing in front of these beautiful red and blue hues of lights, with these mannequins placed symmetrically all around them at this awesome looking house that is a fashion institute. They're spending a lot of time and detail to how the people look and how the scenery looks in the background, but also you're getting these grotesque murders that are happening around it. And coming out in 1964, that's a whole 12 years before Carpenter's Halloween. It has a ton of prototypical slasher elements to it. You got a man who is tall in a jacket with a blank mask and a hat that is going around killing these supermodels and designers. And he has a claw for a hand, a metal claw. And it's just so awesome. It's so close and almost hits the mark for being a really good proto slasher. But for me, it tends to slow down when it comes to the whodunit and mystery thriller elements of it all. What I would want more from it is if it were incorporating more elements that we see later in later slashers or later horror movies, or even later giallo movies that incorporate some supernatural elements into it and try to lean more into the mystique, the scariness. But having that being said, I've seen it before many times, and I try to rewatch it sometimes to see how I feel about it. I put it in a C. I love it and I respect it. I know a lot of people will probably like the giallo subgenre, probably have it higher than me, but I tend to like my giallo movies to lean more into the scary side, more into the supernatural, as you'll see later on with some of the movies that I pick for this list. But I'm definitely going to put it into a C. Even if you're not a fan of giallo, I would recommend checking this one out because it just makes for a good time, and it's just a good proto slasher movie before slashers really took off. On to day 4, I ended up watching the movie called The Stuff. Now, I expected a C, hoped for a B, but I gotta say, I love this movie. I have to put The Stuff in A right out the gate. I love The Stuff. It's a movie that, again, kind of like with Child's Play, it delves into the idea of hyperfixation on consumerism. There's this product that looks like it's like a jelly. It's sold as a dessert, and it's just labeled The Stuff. And it's in this pink container, but when people eat it, it's almost as if they're becoming this hive mind monster. And every now and again, you see some people being affected by the stuff to the point where they mutate or the stuff overtakes them and they just explode. And you have all this big white monster foam coming out of them. And that is The Stuff. It doesn't really ever go much more into what the stuff is, other than that it is a monster that is creating this hive mind-like mentality amongst its consumers. It has one of the cooler characters that I've seen in a horror movie with the main character who is just kind of like this smooth-talking secret agent. And then it's just got this really colorful cast of characters too, with people like Chocolate Chip Charlie, who is one of me and my buddy's favorite characters when we were watching the movie. But I loved the movie. It's a good meta commentary on consumerism. Great practical effects. Feels like something that you'd see kind of out of like an anthology series, but turned into a whole feature-length movie. But I gotta put the stuff in A. I loved it. It was awesome. If you're a fan of practical effects, if you're a fan of, I guess I could call it body horror kind of, but it's more just really cool puppets and plastic body parts that are exploding because they're eating this ice cream. The stuff is awesome. Can't get enough of the stuff. Putting it in A. Moving on to day 5, we have Dolls. Now, Dolls is a movie originally me and my wife wanted to buy on VHS one time because we saw it at a thrift shop and it was a tad on the pricier side at the time. So we ended up leaving it there. But later on, we saw that it ended up just getting more expensive. Tends to be the case with collecting, right? But we ended up watching it on a streaming platform and we had a good time with it. What I realized right away that it was definitely a Charles Band movie. Charles Band, for those of you who aren't aware, is the guy who is behind movies such as the Puppet Master movies or Doll Man. And he's known for his practical effects. He's known for using puppets and stop motion. And this is kind of like the original Puppet Master, it feels like. He uses the original man who plays the Puppet Master in the later movies and even has some designs that look like they evolved into becoming Puppet Master dolls themselves. You'll see some characters in the movie that are puppets that look like the jester that moves his face in later movies. And there's this whole thing about it being too where there's this doll maker who ends up bringing them to life and they end up going about and causing havoc on their victims. Very, very true in the Puppet Master movies as well. So this almost feels like Puppet Master Zero in a weird way. And you got, you know, your typical mean stepmother and the dad who's kind of distant with the child that doesn't really care about the child anymore. And all the daughter wants to do is, you know, be in a loving family, and she has this teddy bear that she cares for, but the parents are mean to her, so they throw the teddy bear at the beginning. Right at the beginning, you see this connection between the little girl and toys. When they stop at this house because their car breaks down, they see that it is a toy maker, and he notices that she has this connection with toys too. So she goes again and gets this toy from the toy maker and creates this bond with it, and kind of creates bonds with toys all over the house. But then you see through stop motion that these toys are actually alive, and they come after the parents when they see the evil intentions of the parents. And they also come after some other characters. You see these punk gypsy girls that are there for the wrong reasons. They follow this other guy who goes into the house, and he's just kind of a big kid at heart, this adult guy. And he brings with him who he thinks were just some hitchhikers, some gypsy girls who were there for the wrong reasons, trying to kind of steal or take advantage of other people. All of these characters end up becoming victims of these puppets. It's a good movie. I got to put it in C. I don't have it over things like Child's Play, and I don't have it nearly as fun or entertaining as Puppet Master. But given that it feels almost like a Puppet Master Zero, I still had a good time with it, and I would definitely recommend Dolls. On to day 6, I ended up having one of my unexpected favorites pop out on this 31 days. And we are talking about Dario Argento's Phenomena. Or depending on where you live, it is also known as Creepers. But I absolutely love this movie. This was my first time actually watching it, and it has everything that I love about the giallo genre when it does these types of elements. It has both the beauty and the eeriness that you see present throughout the whole genre, but it also combines it with the supernatural, which I just love. Some of my favorite movies within the genre have those 3 elements: the beauty, the scariness, but also the supernatural. It just makes for a perfect combination. Now, in this one, it takes place at an all-girls boarding school, and you have the main character named Jennifer, who is played by Jennifer Connelly. If you're familiar with the Clock Tower series, the main character in Clock Tower is named Jennifer, and she's based off of Jennifer Connelly's character in Phenomena, and the whole thing takes place at this clock tower filled with girls. And the main killer uses this big pair of scissors. Well, the first kill in this movie is done with a big pair of scissors, but I just loved it. It has a great soundtrack. If you're a fan of Iron Maiden, specifically Power Slave, you're going to recognize a track that plays predominantly throughout the movie. It has some really cool scenes because Jennifer Connelly goes through this dream state, and it's very eerie because she will be talking to bugs, and she actually uses her ability to communicate with bugs as a way to figure out who the killer is. It has great scenes whenever you see her sleepwalking through her dreamlike state whenever she's communicating with the bugs, and she finds out who the killer is at the end. But I originally wanted to put this in B when I was writing up all the movies. But now that I'm at the end of these 31 days and I've seen all these movies, I got to put it in A in terms of where I have it. Phenomena is a great movie. I love it. If you haven't seen it, go ahead and check it out. And play Clock Tower while you're at it. Clock Tower I believe it just started putting itself onto modern hardware with a English translation. So go ahead and check it out. Yeah, play both. Play the movie and play Clock Tower. Come back here and tell me what you thought. Day 7, and we're hitting a stinker. Now, as you see my green friend right here, I love practical effects. I love monster movies. I love things like Gremlins. I love things like Ghoulies. I love things like Critters. I even love the Muppets, right? So anything involving some goofy puppets, especially in something that kind of blurs the line between comedy and horror, I love that stuff. I'm into practical effects very much so. And with Gremlins, when it came out, it spawned a lot of copycats. And one of the ones that I really do not recommend unless you just love watching something just for the sake of it being terrible. I know there are a lot of people who can find the joy in things that are bad still and within this genre of horror, but Hobgoblins, I'm just going to go straight to it. I got to put it in an F. They are weird critters that look just like Gremlins, and they just don't move when they're on screen. It's like they spent the budget on making the puppets themselves and would just place them in scenarios, and they didn't really move them too much besides like maybe an actor's moving one arm off on the side. But they have these psychic powers that can make people feel like they're fulfilling their fantasy, and then something terribly goes wrong, almost like a genie. How you hear like a genie will grant you your wishes, but there's always going to be a catch. That's what the Hobgoblins are. They're these aliens that are copycats of Gremlins that kill people by making them live these little dream fantasies. I can't put it any higher than F. I did not have a good time watching it in the past. I did not have a good time watching it again this year. I love stuff like this. I still have it on tape, but that's just more the collector in me. Hobgoblins, I got to put it at an F. Moving on to day 8, we have a classic. We have the 1974 movie, The Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Now, this movie has its fingerprints all over the horror genre. It predates Halloween by 4 years and even predates Black Christmas, which is known as the proto-slasher before Halloween that was based on a holiday. And this movie, you have a lot of elements that you'll see in future slashers to come, like a big, scary, masked man who is killing teenagers, and he's chainsaw wielding. Now, this movie takes place in this setting in Texas where these people find themselves their car breaking down, and they make their way towards this house that is known as the Sawyer's house. And it's just got this creepy cannibalistic family, one of them being Leatherface, who is the icon of the entire series. He's got, again, a mask made out of people's skin, and he's a chainsaw wielder. And it's very graphic. I wouldn't say graphic in terms of what it shows, but given this is 1974, and this is before movies like Saw or movies like Audition, things that you're just so used to over-the-top body horror now, Terrifier as a series is making its mark in how gory it can get. This movie was known for being over-the-top in terms of its gore, even getting banned in certain parts of the world. But it's more implied. You just have the body parts around them. You're seeing these body parts present throughout the movie in this dark and stinky house in the middle of Texas. And I believe it takes place during the summer. So these actors are just sweating from every pore on their body, and you just see these nasty, rotting body parts all over the place. It makes for a gross atmosphere, but it's also very good still. Like this movie, I could still come back to it now, even though we're talking 50 years later, something like that. It holds up. It holds up. And even though it doesn't have all the elements of slashers that evolved to come, still a great movie. I got to put it in A. Now, the second Mario Bava movie that I will review on this list, the first one earlier I talked about it was Blood and Black Lace. This one is Kill Baby Kill. And this one I do like more than Blood and Black Lace. This one introduces supernatural elements, which I told you guys before with Phenomena and things like Suspiria. I love in my Giallo. I love it to be creepy. I like it to be also pretty to look at, but I also want there to be some sort of underlining spooky element to it that can't be described other than it just being supernatural, right? So in this one, it takes place in this 1900s Transylvanian town where there is the ghost of a little girl that is haunting the town and frightening people and killing them. It makes for some really cool scenes. A lot of the movie looks surreal. You have these dreamlike sequences kind of making these illusions that not only are the people in the movie going through, but so are you. There's scenes where someone will be running and it looks like they're running through the exact same loop again, and it'll just loop all over again. And then any shots where the girl ghost pops up just looks so eerie and creepy. This just has the prototypical supernatural giallo feel to it, and I ended up liking it a lot. I don't know if I like it as much as something like Phenomena or Suspiria, but I'm definitely putting it in my rewatch alert. It's got some trippy sequences, kind of reminds me of Houseu, the Japanese horror movie. Love that movie too. So that movie is really good. I'm going to have to give it a rewatch, but for now I'm giving it a B. Maybe if I do this list again and I watch it again, I'll use this list for rewatches too. Moving on to day 10, we have Child's Play 3. Now, this is the last installment of the Child's Play series right before they introduce Tiffany. So in this movie, Chucky still looks like this for the most part, and he doesn't get all cut up and, sawed and put back together. And he is now just starting to develop his taste for one-liners. Yeah, this movie is a little bit goofier. I wish I could have more good things to say about it. I wish I could say it's just as good as 2. But the fact of the matter is they knew they had a money pit when they started making the third one, because 2 and 3, I believe, are only a year apart. I want to say even 10 months apart. So they went ahead and went straight into recording the third one and pumped it out. Now, this has some weird, awkward time gap, because between 2 and 3, supposedly like 10 years or something has passed. So Andy's at this military school now. He's a little bit older, and he's still traumatized by Chucky. They don't believe him, so they think he's some sort of delinquent that is probably responsible for the murders of all the victims of the first 2 movies. Chucky follows him to the military school, trying to still achieve his goal of getting his body put into Andy, but the whole plot just doesn't make sense. I know the idea of a killer doll coming to life in general doesn't make sense, but this one is kind of stupid. The doll company rebuilds him for some whatever reason, and his blood spilling into the vat that was used to create the good guy dolls is for some reason what reactivates him. It's probably magic. I don't know. There's something I probably wasn't paying attention to, but I've seen that movie a ton of times, and I wish I could have it higher. But just for the sake of, you could feel the tonal shift and where the series is going. Chucky is just saying nothing but one-liners the whole time. It's a little bit goofier, and I just don't care for the characters as much as I wanted to root for Andy in the previous movies. I'm going to put this in C tier. So Child's Play 3, still a fun one. I like it more than Bride, which comes later, but I got to put it in C. For day 11, we have a special one. We have Halloween 3. Halloween 3 is the third installment of the Halloween series. However, it has nothing to do with the famous iconic slasher villain that is Michael Myers. Originally, John Carpenter wanted to make it an anthology series where every bad thing that would happen was going to happen on Halloween. And for the third one, Carpenter ended up dabbling in the anthology thing that he wanted to try, where every time he makes a Halloween movie, it was going to be a different problem in a different area with a different set of characters. So instead of Michael Myers, you have this kind of evil corporation similar to The Stuff, where The Stuff, it was based on consumerism. This one's kind of based on consumerism too. There's this company called Silver Shamrock, and they're making these Halloween masks of witches and jack-o'-lanterns and skeletons, and these kids are all supposed to wear them, but it's all supposed to perform this evil mystic ritual that heralds back to Celtics lore in terms of Halloween. It ended up being a big flop because nobody liked it. Everyone wanted to see Michael Myers, and they were just upset that they didn't get it. But what they're really missing out on is that it had this cool feel to it. I saw what Carpenter was doing. This does very much so feel like this pulp magazine horror creep show trick or treat type entry. It had a great story. I loved the main character. Tom Atkins plays this doctor who ends up figuring out that some deaths are linked to this weird mask making company. And the more he investigates, the more he realizes that there's just this evil spell going on around it. I got to put it in A. I could see why people were disappointed if they were expecting Michael Myers to show up. And he does kind of show up for just a little snippet. There's a scene where the main character's at a bar, and on the TV at the bar, you see Halloween is on a commercial, and it's like saying like, the classic hit is back, Halloween, and it shows Michael Myers. Even though it was a different movie set in a different universe, still love this movie. And if you have not already checked it out, check it out. If you're a horror buff, you know exactly what I'm talking about when it comes to Halloween 3. Moving on from one iconic franchise to another, we're going right into day 12. I got A Nightmare on Elm Street. Freddy Krueger, it's about as iconic as they come and really made a lot of people scared to go to sleep. I myself, I saw it when I was a kid as well on TV. I caught it one time when I was at an older cousin's house, and I just got some memories of being scared to death of Freddy Krueger. And the kids at the playground too would also just bring it up and be like, "Oh, have you heard of Freddy Krueger? He kills people in their sleep." And hearing stuff like that as a kid makes you not want to sleep when you still believe in things like monsters and the boogeyman. So A Nightmare on Elm Street is a terrifying concept. And just in general, that he's this shapeshifter that ploys on your fears is incredibly frightening. It has great practical effects. And they carry on in the later movies too. And this is right before Freddy starts to inherit, kind of like with Chucky, his much more well-known comedic persona. You have the boogeyman who's coming after them, who has these claw hands, and he can shapeshift. And if he knows your fears, he's going to mess with you. So, and then when you can't sleep either, it messes with your psyche. So you're already losing your sanity slowly because you're not sleeping because you want to avoid him. And he's pulling on your fears and your psyche on top of that. Great franchise, excellent installment. I can't put it anything lower than A. Excellent horror movie, A Nightmare on Elm Street. Awesome movie. For day 13, you know there's only one movie I could watch when it comes to the number 13. That's right. I'm talking about none other than Friday the 13th. This movie came out in 1980 and is also one of the pillars of the main slasher titans. You got Freddy, you got Jason, you got Chucky, you got Michael Myers. This is one of them. And I went and started rewatching some of these movies for this list. And I really found a newfound appreciation for Friday the 13th. I think Jason may now be my favorite slasher besides Chucky. Chucky's probably always going to be my favorite slasher character. But I think Jason, I may have him above Michael. I may have him above Freddy now. There's something about the atmosphere of this campy teenagers dying by a lake and their counselors. It's a formula that just works. And you could probably watch movies like that over and over again, even going into some of the other movies that I love, like Sleepaway Camp. But this movie came out in 1980, so it came out a couple years after Halloween. At this point, the slasher genre has been defined, but it's still before things like A Nightmare on Elm Street, still before things like Chucky. And what I appreciate about the first two Friday the 13th movies is you really start to understand who Jason and his mother are as characters. I don't want to go into spoilers for it too much. Watch it blind if you haven't seen it. It really goes into the lore of the character of Jason. Jason is not who you expect him to be yet. He is not yet this hockey mask wielding slasher character. Matter of fact, we don't even see that iteration until the third movie. It takes two whole movies kind of as, well, exposition almost in a way to really truly understand Jason and his motives. And it made me appreciate the series a lot more. I got to put it in A. Another iconic slasher villain. I think I have Jason like really high up in terms of my favorite slasher characters now. I'm going to probably do a deep dive of these on the offside besides watching these 31 movies. Day 14, and I got to tell you guys, I think I was swinging pretty hard with these first 15 movies. This next one right here is something that I haven't seen yet, and I know is kind of a cult following of a movie and a franchise to a lot of people. So if you're a fan of horror and you've seen this one, you probably love it as well. I'm talking about Phantasm. Now, I have yet to actually check out the Phantasm series, but let me tell you, it has made a new fan out of me. This movie takes place in 1979, and it's got great atmosphere, you guys. There's just a lot of great shots in a graveyard. There's a mausoleum, and it just looks symmetrical. There's a lot of shots where there's just these hallways and pillars and statues. It looks great, and the score is awesome. It's very dark and ambient and psychedelic, and it plays into the theme very well. The villain in this one isn't your typical slasher monster, this entity known as the Tall Man. He looks menacing, and he's just this older, almost like butler looking type guy, and he works at a mausoleum where they keep a lot of these dead bodies, and it appears as though he's reanimating them himself. This woman who is just known as, I believe she's known as the Lady in Lavender, and she seduces her victims and then turns into the Tall Man, and he kills them. And then there's these orbs that fly around that have these death spikes that fly out of them, and it looks like something you'd see out of a science fiction movie. He has a way of creating these little trolls that are his servants from dead bodies. And you see this kid and his older brother discover that slowly some people they know are starting to die, and they're coming back as these little trolls. And they start investigating the mausoleum on their own. Really trippy ending. Threw me for a loop. It pulled me out from under the rug, and it was pretty emotional at the end. A great start to a series that I will say is pretty fun. If you haven't checked it out already, I'm putting Phantasm for day 14 on my list in A. Loved it. Wrapping up the first 15 days of this challenge, I let the missus pick this movie. So I had been watching horror movies throughout this entire month, and this house has just been nothing but scary stuff up and down. And I asked my wife if she wanted to watch something specifically on this given day, and she wanted to watch Hocus Pocus. Now, Hocus Pocus is notorious for being known as this like Disney Channel type movie. And I gotta say, even though I don't go out of my way really to watch Hocus Pocus when it's on, it's still fun. It's got this charm to it. Bette Midler, Sarah Jessica Parker, all these pretty good known actors are in this. And Bette Midler and her two sisters, they're these witches. They're resurrected in modern day Salem. Well, modern day being the 90s. And there's just this big culture shock to seeing them come to life now because they're confused with today's technology. They call everything witchcraft or a spell, and they actually think that people going around dressed up trick-or-treating are actual goblins and warlocks and things like that. It makes for a funny time, and actually if you're going to try and get a younger audience or people who maybe aren't too much into something scary, Hocus Pocus is a great start, guys. If you're trying to get people into the horror genre, I think something like this or Gremlins or Beetlejuice can ease someone into something later, and then maybe they can get into the campier, scary stuff like Chucky, or maybe they can get into maybe one of the Friday the 13th sequels or the Nightmare on Elm Street sequel, Evil Dead. But I would say it's a good start. Hocus Pocus is definitely something for all ages. I'm going to give it an A just because I had a good time watching it with the missus, and it's memories like this why I watch these movies, guys. So put in Hocus Pocus an A just for the sake of the memories and the time spent with loved ones. And that makes up 15 movies that we have seen so far for the Halloween season. Now, if you liked this video, don't worry, you guys. I do have a part 2 coming up where I will cover the rest of the movies that I watched leading up to Halloween. If you had a good time with this video, let me know in the comments. I'm always also looking for suggestions of horror movies. If there's anything I watched that you did like or are going to check out because of the video, please let me know. I would love to hear that too. And if there's anything I didn't bring up, bring it up in the comments too. I'm always open to new suggestions when it comes to horror. But anyways, you guys, have a great spooky season. Happy Halloween. I'm so glad you guys stuck around to check this out. And keep an eye out on the channel because I am going to drop part 2 possibly sometimes next week involving the next 16 movies. And you might want to watch that one because I ended up saving some of my favorites for last. So go ahead and check out part 2 when that one ends up dropping. And stay safe, you guys. Have a good Halloween. Please be responsible. Dress up in a costume. Eat some candy. Do all the shenanigans that you want to do. And happy spooky season.